Russia is exploding from within as waves of armed guerrilla groups rise up against the Kremlin. A series of secret fires are incinerating communication towers, railway locomotives, and strategic logistics routes. These resistance groups, made up of Russian citizens, have now stood up, striking directly at the bloodline of Putin's war, causing infrastructure to collapse. Supply lines are paralyzed. Fear spreads throughout the regime. Internal uprising in Russia. Resistance movement erupts, strikes directly at Putin's war machine. Right within Russian territory, a second front is forming and spreading. Ukraine's Defense Intelligence Directorate, HUR, confirms that from late October to early November, multiple Russian resistance groups executed the largest series of sabotage operations since summer. The targets weren't random. They were critical nodes in Moscow's military logistics and communications system. In the latest wave of attacks, resistance groups torched 3 communication towers in Stolitomak, destroying telecommunications equipment that served to coordinate information in central Russia. Near Vologda, a railway relay control cabinet, a crucial transport hub connecting Russia's rear with the Ukrainian front, was also sabotaged. These infrastructures play a vital role in military transport, communications, and operational coordination. Being hit right in the heart of Russia has paralyzed multiple supply lines, throwing the weapons and personnel transport system into temporary chaos. HUR reports that resistance groups are operating with increasing sophistication, trained, equipped with intelligence, and receiving technical support. Sabotage campaigns are no longer isolated actions, but operate like covert strikes hitting directly at logistics capacity, a component already exhausted by the prolonged war of attrition. Parallel to this, the Free Russia movement announced it has burned multiple railway locomotives used to transport weapons, ammunition, and military equipment to the Ukrainian front. These locomotives were located in military logistics areas, meaning each sabotage not only causes material damage, but forces Russia to expend time, resources, and manpower to restore the entire transport chain. Since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, the Free Russia movement and allied resistance groups have emerged as the most effective sabotage force operating within Russian territory. They are former Russian citizens who decided to side with Ukraine and oppose Putin's regime. For them, this isn't just fighting for Ukraine, it's fighting for a free Russia, liberated from dictatorship and war crimes. Looking at the big picture, the war the Kremlin launched is no longer confined to Ukraine. It's silently turning back to strike Russia itself, hitting military bases, infrastructure, social morale, and the regime's legitimacy. What Moscow wants to hide through propaganda is becoming clearer than ever. The war isn't just consuming Russian soldiers on the front lines, it's fracturing Russia from within, where discontent, resistance, and crisis are smoldering and spreading day by day. Russian air defense shoots at its own hospital in Crimea. On the morning of November 6th, Simferopol, the capital of Crimea, witnessed a bizarre incident that clearly reflects the chaotic state of Russia's air defense system. When Russian units fired back to intercept a UAV attack targeting an oil depot in Bitumne village, they ended up damaging the Samashko Clinical Hospital, the largest medical facility in the region. According to reports from local monitoring groups, the incident occurred around 7 a.m. when the air defense system opened fire with heavy density to counter Ukrainian UAVs. A barrage of heavy machine gun rounds from Russian forces fell along ballistic trajectories into the residential area. These large-caliber rounds punctured the facade and shattered windows on the 8th floor of Samashko Hospital. Fortunately, no one was injured, but the material damage was very real. Multiple 5 to 6 millimeter thick panes, triple-layered glass used for high-security structures, were destroyed. The incident not only shows the danger to civilians every time Russia responds to UAVs, but also exposes the lack of control and panic in Moscow's air defense network in Crimea. Just hours before the incident, around 2:30 a.m., Simferopol residents reported a major fire at an oil depot near Bitumne village. Videos circulating on social media showed columns of flames dozens of meters high and continuous explosions, likely from fuel and ammunition detonating after a precision strike. Despite denial efforts from Russia, multiple independent sources confirm this was part of a large-scale Ukrainian UAV attack, targeting logistics centers, fuel depots, and energy networks serving the Russian military on the peninsula. This chain of incidents shows Russia is under immense pressure from Ukraine's long-range, precise, and continuous UAVs. In a state of extreme tension, Russian air defense forces are prone to mistakes, firing with uncontrolled elevation angles so that their own defensive rounds rain down on their civilian facilities. Chaos at Russian border. Corruption becomes the only way through customs. The Russia-Kazakhstan border, once bustling with trade, has now turned into a giant parking lot stretching for tens of kilometers. Since early September, Russia abruptly suspended customs clearance, citing suspected customs declaration fraud, bringing nearly all traffic to a standstill. According to figures published by Russian media itself, over 10,000 trucks are stuck at border crossings, many waiting nearly 2 months in severely deprived conditions. The chaos has spread to the point where many drivers have been forced to abandon their vehicles, leaving behind goods worth millions of rubles, from electronic components and consumer goods to unmanned aerial vehicles and banned Western imports. Drivers still trying to hold on must live in cramped conditions, without clean water, bathing facilities or food, with accidents and conflicts occurring daily. Irina, wife of a driver from Irkutsk, describes the scene in 2 short words: hell. Her husband had to borrow money to buy food, then was ultimately forced to abandon his truck after running out of money, unable to continue waiting. Moscow accuses import-export companies of deliberately waiting at the border to evade inspections, but according to drivers' accounts, this is a one-sided story. Whether trucks carry legal goods or not, all are held without clear reason. At the Mashtakovo crossing, driver Igor from Orenburg refutes claims that congestion has been resolved. 2 weeks ago there were 5,000 trucks, now there are 7,000. Only trucks belonging to companies under Gadzi Gadzhiev get through. People say you have to pay $700 per truck. Customs doesn't even bother inspecting anymore. This shows the customs system has been completely distorted. Rules no longer work, replaced by privileges, protection, and cash. Previously, each truck took only 15 minutes to complete procedures. Now, drivers must wait for weeks, even tens of days. In that chaotic vacuum, a black market customs system has formed. Brokers appear everywhere at crossings, collecting $300 to $1,000 per truck to expedite procedures. One driver stuck for 47 days recounts, "I'm carrying electronics. The customer is suing me." Many people have had to pay fixers. There's no other way to get through the crossing. The congestion exposes a deeper truth. The Russian system operates on corruption, privilege, and arbitrariness, where every crisis is quickly turned into a money-making opportunity for interest groups clinging to the state apparatus. Pokrovsk becomes Putin's mad gamble. 170,000 Russian troops pour in to capture one ruined city. Pokrovsk, once a bustling industrial city in Donetsk, now consists only of leveled streets, charred residential areas, and roads full of bomb craters. Yet this devastated place has become Vladimir Putin's #1 military objective in winter 2025. President Volodymyr Zelensky confirms, inside the city, only about 314 Russian soldiers remain, holding out in ruined buildings. They're the remnants of previous assault waves, trapped within Ukraine's defensive perimeter. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of other Russian troops are still massed on the city's outskirts, seeking to force a final breakthrough. Zelensky reports that in just the first 3 days of November, Russia launched 220 attacks, mobilizing armored vehicles and infantry continuously pushing into the city. However, most of these assault waves were broken by Ukraine's airborne forces, Marines, and SSO Special Forces, units controlling the vital transport routes connecting Pokrovsk with Mirnohrad and Dobropilya. These roads are the key to preventing the city from falling into complete encirclement. Russia has penetrated some southern and southeastern neighborhoods, but most forces remain halted at the outer belt, heavily dependent on artillery and kamikaze UAVs to pulverize each building block before infantry can advance. The number of Russians pouring into Pokrovsk shocks even veteran military analysts. 170,000 soldiers, equivalent to 1/3 of total Russian forces occupying Ukraine. This is an army as large as Russia's entire force that launched the 2022 invasion, but now used solely to capture a single city. To visualize the absurdity, except for 4 European countries, Poland, France, Germany, and Italy, Russian forces at Pokrovsk outnumber the entire standing armies of the remaining 10 countries combined. A massive army, yet being consumed daily by Ukrainian UAVs, precision artillery, and lightning counterattacks. According to Zelensky, October 2025 marked Russia's highest casualty rate throughout the war. Over 25,000 soldiers taken out of action. And if unconfirmed cases are included, the actual number could reach 27,000 to 28,000. Most of these perished in the Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad and Chasiv Yar areas, where Ukrainian UAVs destroyed hundreds of armoured vehicles, troop assembly points and logistics routes. The dense presence of UAVs has forced Russia to move at night, split formations, and even abandon many tanks to avoid detection. Moscow wants to capture Pokrovsk before winter tightens its grip. Ice and frozen mud will lock down tanks, making any breakthrough efforts virtually impossible. But with only a few hundred Russian soldiers trapped inside the city, reflects a harsh truth. Russia's main assault thrust has been stopped dead. Supply lines from the south are continuously cut by Ukrainian UAVs, causing attacking units to gradually lose mobility and support capability. Pokrovsk, from a target to capture quickly in a few weeks, has turned into a meat grinder, consuming nearly 1/3 of Russian forces in Ukraine. Russian troops dying like flies at Pokrovsk, chilling testimony from a Russian soldier. A Russian soldier calling himself Elephant, belonging to the 5th Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, describes in horrifying terms the reality at the Pokrovsk front. Dead bodies everywhere, tanks rolling over soldiers' corpses, and no one has the strength to bury them. His story isn't just personal memory, but a vivid picture of a battlefield devouring people and conscience. Elephant says he signed a contract in April 2024 in Ulyanovsk as a driver. Instead of a civilian job, he and dozens of others, including 33 Indian citizens tricked into fighting, had their phones and documents confiscated, were imprisoned in a bunker near Donetsk, and only allowed out with armed guards. After 2 months, instead of driving as contracted, he was forced to join an infantry assault unit. When they protested, they were threatened with execution on the spot. If you open your mouth again, you won't live long. The most painful memory was the night of September 12, 2024, when Elephant and 119 comrades were loaded onto armoured vehicles, advancing toward Krasnohorivka without preparatory artillery, without support. At the front line, Ukrainian forces counterattacked fiercely. The catastrophic result? Of the convoy of 10 armoured vehicles, only 2 returned. Of 120 people, only 4 survived. They had to crawl through minefields for 6 days to escape. That disaster turned the survivors into witnesses to a strategy that appears to be conducted with human lives. After recovering, Elephant was transferred to Pokrovsk, a place he calls worse than hell. His description is cold, but no less haunting. Corpses scattered across fields, many bodies burned black or crushed by machinery. Bodies bloated, deformed. No one collects them, no one buries them. Don't believe when they say missing. They're still lying there, in the fields. No one cares, he says. These words expose how massive losses are covered up with the word missing in official reports. Elephant specifically names the biggest problem, not the enemy, but the commanders themselves. According to him, commanders are the ones who kill anyone they don't like. The discipline system has degenerated to the point where soldiers must bear financial responsibility if they lose equipment. Lose a drone, soldiers must pay 300,000 to 400,000 rubles out of pocket to buy it back. If they don't have money, the consequence is beatings or disappearance. A mechanism of paying to survive, fear replacing discipline and strategy. That's the core of moral collapse in the ranks. Hundreds of Russian workers strike over unpaid wages, threaten Putin's revolutionary project. In the city of Dimitrovgrad, in Ulyanovsk region, one of the nuclear energy projects the Kremlin touts as a revolutionary breakthrough is falling into chaos. About 300 construction workers involved in building the new nuclear research center, based on the MBIR fast reactor, have gone on collective strike after being denied wages for 2 straight months. Workers say they haven't received salaries since September 2025. Travel money has been owed since May-June. Vacation pay has been absent since August. Not only that, meals have been cut, shuttle services stopped, and shift workers were evicted from dormitories because the construction contractor failed to pay operating costs. They described their situation in the most straightforward terms: mounting debt, terrible living conditions, abandoned right in the middle of a national project construction site. In a video sent to Russian Investigative Committee Chairman Alexander Bastrykin, the workers' group clearly states they've reached a dead end. "We have no money left to pay debts, can't send money home to our families. Toilets are overflowing. We have to buy drinking water out of our own pockets. Debt is crushing us. Life can't continue like this." Petitions sent to the prosecutor's office all sink into silence. With no other option, they decided to stop working under Article 142 of the Russian Labour Code, which allows workers to temporarily suspend work if wages are delayed more than 15 days, while still receiving average wages. The MBIR fast reactor is the pride that President Putin has repeatedly praised as a symbol of Russia's scientific and nuclear technology power. But reality in Dimitrovgrad shows a harsh truth. Even the highest priority project cannot escape chaotic finances and poor management. Worker strikes mean construction progress is halted. If the crisis drags on, the MBIR project will not only fall behind schedule, but could become the clearest evidence of Russia's depletion of resources and governance capacity in wartime.
As Moscow struggles with defeat, Beijing has quietly deployed an extensive espionage campaign, infiltrating Russia's scientific and military systems alike. China's fundamental secret, Putin's ignorance, means he'll always be deceived. Professor Ming Zhuzheng, Taiwan's leading scholar on Chinese politics, once recounted a unique experience from his student days. He took a course called Chinese Communist Ideology, taught over 2 semesters. On the very first day, his professor said, "In the first semester, I will teach you how the Chinese Communist Party thinks. Because the CCP has a worldview, view of life, and view of society completely different from ordinary people. If you don't understand how they think, you won't understand why they act the way they do, and you certainly won't be able to predict their next move." According to that lecture, learning didn't stop at reading theory. Students had to debate, argue, and practice thinking like a real communist. In short, the professor said, in the first semester, I must turn you into communists. In the second semester, I will turn you back. After returning to National Taiwan University, Professor Ming realized a worrying truth. Taiwanese society knows far too little about the Chinese Communist Party. Precisely because they don't understand the CCP, people are easily deceived, and the Chinese Communist Party is exceptionally skilled at deception. He argues that to truly understand them, one needs not just to read documents, but to perceive the pathology in their culture of power, something that foreigners, even those fluent in Chinese, find very difficult to sense. According to the professor, the CCP has a pathological sensitivity and pathological obsession with power. Every action they take, no matter how moral or righteous it may appear, ultimately comes down to one question: how do we seize and consolidate power? Political power, in their thinking, is paramount. He gives an example. Jack Ma, or Ma Yun, had enormous wealth, but in the end was still removed from the game because he had no power. In that society, money is only temporary. Once you hold political power, you can take back everything. The professor recalls a classic saying his teacher once taught him, originating from Lenin: "Dealing with capitalism is very easy. They will even buy the rope we use to hang them with." According to him, this is the logic that runs through every action of the Chinese Communist Party. Mao Zedong once said, "To deal with the Kuomintang, we have 3 great treasures: party building, united front work, and armed struggle." But according to Professor Ming, there are 2 more treasures that few mention: cultural propaganda and espionage. In total, there are 5 pillars: party building, united front, armed struggle, cultural propaganda, espionage. In his lecture, Professor Ming Zhuzheng particularly emphasizes cultural propaganda, the soft propaganda tactic. He describes how the CCP operates as follows. On the surface, they engage in exchanges, cooperation, discussions about culture, religion, tourism. They can even discuss Mazu worship, feng shui, cuisine, or golf. But the goal isn't genuine exchange. Rather, it's to gradually build a sense of harmony, familiarity, and trustworthiness. This is precisely united front work, making friends to exert influence. They will find common language with you, cater to your interests. If you like money, they talk about money. If you like food, they talk about food. If you like golf, they play golf with you. And from there, gradually, they bring up political viewpoints. At first, it's statements that seem reasonable, then gradually transform into shared beliefs. Before you know it, you've been brainwashed without realizing it. According to Professor Ming, cultural propaganda is an extremely sophisticated and cunning form of propaganda. You think you're just chatting about ties, fashion, or culture, but in reality, you're being led into their political ideology. The ultimate goal is to make you accept and legitimize their power, becoming someone who sympathizes and eventually consents. Their lowest platform is talking about coffee, fashion, or tourism, but their highest platform is getting you to accept their domination. Understanding how the Chinese Communist Party thinks isn't about copying them, but about protecting yourself from their manipulation. How much do President Putin and the Russian people understand about Beijing's cunning schemes? Russian intelligence documents label China as the enemy, revealing deep-seated suspicion. A leaked internal document from Russia's Federal Security Service, FFSB, shows Moscow has labeled Beijing as the adversary and harbors deep concerns about Chinese intelligence infiltration. According to the 8-page plan accessed by the New York Times, Russian authorities believe China is expanding recruitment and espionage operations across multiple critical sectors. The document warns that Beijing is actively recruiting Russian scientists, intelligence officers, and dissidents within the system, particularly those with access to technological data, military information, and advanced research. The objective: to gather sensitive information to monitor and predict Russia's strategic moves. In the context of the Ukraine war and Arctic tensions, the FSB believes disaffected individuals are the easiest channel through which to access Moscow's military networks, infrastructure, and information. According to the document, Chinese intelligence is believed to be monitoring Russian military operations in Ukraine, aiming to decode Western weapons and learn modern tactics. Additionally, Beijing has deployed espionage in the Arctic, exploiting mining companies and university research centers as cover to access scientific, environmental, and military data. China's use of civilian infrastructure, ports, research stations, to conceal military activities increases the difficulty of verification and hides the true nature of their actions. Part of the report mentions China's potential to lay the groundwork for future territorial claims, particularly in sparsely populated and strategically important border regions, where Moscow has little actual control. This concern isn't unfounded, as the geo-economic complex in the Far East increasingly reveals itself under the gravitational pull from China. Though on paper both nations declare a no-limits relationship, the FSB describes this as an intense battle of wits in the shadows, friends on the surface, enemies from within. The golden opportunity. Russia collapses. China acts. In October 2025, as the Ukraine war enters its fourth year, the world witnesses a new configuration taking shape. Russia comprehensively weakened, while China quietly prepares for a historic move. Many analysts worry that if Moscow collapses, Beijing won't miss the golden opportunity to expand northward, reclaiming territories lost to Russia over a century ago. Diane Francis, American-Canadian editor-in-chief of the National Post, emphasizes, "It's not hard to understand China. They are master opportunists, and Putin is the one inadvertently paving the way for them." Over the past decade, the West believed Taiwan would be the first target of China's expansionist ambitions. But according to Diane Francis, that was never the real plan. Beijing doesn't need an invasion. They only want to pressure Taiwan into accepting the one country, two systems model. According to Francis, China is playing a 200-year chess game, and they know their moment has arrived. As Russia gradually loses control, Beijing can intervene on humanitarian grounds, protect border interests, or step-by-step establish economic military presence in Siberia and the Far East. Every scenario is being prepared in advance. Diane Francis warns, when Russia loses in Ukraine, their center of power will disintegrate. No one, not even Putin's successor, can hold together a country spanning 11 time zones. On the eastern edge lies Manchuria, territory China has always considered stolen. They want it back, and they will get it back. She believes Beijing is fully prepared militarily, diplomatically, and in terms of media to act on the day Russia collapses. A propaganda campaign could be launched under the banner of restoring historical justice, accompanied by humanitarian aid and cooperative reconstruction of border regions, the opening move for China to gain actual control over Russia's far eastern territories. Chinese call for reclaiming Siberia as Russia loses in Ukraine. The strategic earthquake after the war. A video spreading like wildfire on Chinese social media has shocked Russian public opinion. Millions of views, tens of thousands of comments, all revolving around calls for Beijing to reclaim territories once belonging to China, but seized by Tsarist Russia in the Far East. The clip asserts this is the historic moment to restore justice, recalling the treaties of Aigun, 1858, and Beijing, 1860. Documents the Qing court was forced to sign, ceding millions of square kilometers to Russia. As the war in Ukraine causes Moscow to decline, this psychology of territorial revenge has suddenly surged more powerfully than ever. Dr. Fred Hoffman, former U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, former military attaché to China and Asia expert, states bluntly, China may be helping Russia in the war with Ukraine, but make no mistake, Beijing is just waiting for Russia to weaken before making its move. If Moscow collapses, they will quickly seize back the territories that once belonged to the Qing dynasty. Trust me, it will happen. Dr. Hoffman recalls the past, in the 1950s to 1960s, when the Soviet Union was a superpower and China was still poor and hungry. Back then, the Soviet Union was the big spoon in the Soviet-China brotherhood relationship, he analogizes. But now, roles have reversed. China is the world's factory, while Russia is merely a cheap raw materials supplier. From energy and minerals to infrastructure, Moscow has become increasingly dependent on Beijing, especially after being isolated by the West. Every Chinese child is taught about the century of humiliation and unequal treaties, and Russia is always mentioned as the biggest land grabber, Hoffman adds. According to analysts, videos calling for territorial recovery aren't just random acts. They reflect a nationalist trend being deliberately cultivated within China, a tool to consolidate the regime's legitimacy during times of global upheaval. If Russia collapses, Beijing may see it as a golden opportunity to expand influence into Siberia, a vast territory rich in oil, gas, rare metals, and with strategic position bordering the Pacific. A liberation painted with historical justification will easily activate national pride among hundreds of millions of Chinese. Trust me, the Russians understand this very well, and they are terrified to the core, Hoffman concludes. While China dreams of Siberia, Moscow is reeling from within. Famous propagandist Maxim Kalashnikov, who once served in the state media system, suddenly admits Russia is failing. Kalashnikov says the war is no longer just a military conflict, but a comprehensive attrition campaign, striking directly at Russia's economy, logistics, energy, and public morale. Successive attacks on oil refineries, pipeline pumping stations, and the Nord Stream gas pipeline are gradually paralyzing Russia's economy. Initially, Russian media tried to hide the crisis, but outrage from pro-war Z-bloggers caused the propaganda curtain to collapse. Commentators who once cheered for inevitable victory are now publicly calling for withdrawal from Ukraine. These admissions, though few, are enough to show that Russian morale has collapsed before the military does. China spies on Russia, the shadow war between two allies. After the leak of internal documents from Russia's Federal Security Service, FSB, labeling Beijing as the adversary and expressing deep concerns about Chinese intelligence infiltration, Russia-China relations are entering a phase filled with suspicion. On the surface, both nations still present themselves as comprehensive strategic partners, but behind the scenes, distrust is growing daily. Xi Jinping increasingly shows irritation with how Putin is conducting the war in Ukraine, an endless war dragging Russia into the quagmire and threatening Beijing's long-term interests. China understands clearly, if the West decides to intervene more forcefully, they could be dragged into a global confrontation they don't want. Beijing needs Russia as a shield against the West, but cannot let itself be dragged down with Moscow. The paradox is that Xi still wants Putin to survive because he has invested too much in this personal and strategic relationship. A weakened Russia still led by Putin would be easier to control than a chaotic Russia where a successor might not follow China's trajectory. Therefore, Zhong Nanhai both supports Putin diplomatically on the surface while secretly guarding against and monitoring their own ally. In mid-2024, a series of reports from Russian cybersecurity companies revealed a shocking discovery. Computer systems of many Russian state agencies had been infiltrated, and technical traces indicated origins from China. These attacks didn't destroy systems, but quietly installed backdoors to monitor internal data, defense projects, and Russia's energy sector. Notably, the hackers didn't target the Ukrainian military or NATO, but rather their own allies' infrastructure. Alongside the shadow war, Beijing is expanding another war, the economic war. Xi Jinping's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, launched in 2013, has become the most powerful tool for China to expand global influence without firing a shot. BRI is a massive network of railways, seaports, highways, and energy corridors connecting East Asia to Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. By the end of 2024, 147 countries had signed on, accounting for nearly 2/3 of the world's population and 40% of global GDP. With this project, China isn't just pouring capital into infrastructure construction, but also expanding financial control, forcing borrowing nations to depend on Beijing's conditions. Many BRI contracts contain clauses allowing China to demand debt repayment at any time or prohibit borrowers from cooperating with the West. Russia, in the context of being isolated and needing money, chose to participate in BRI, hoping to leverage Chinese investment to compensate for losses from sanctions. But in reality, the Kremlin understands very well that BRI is gradually replacing Russia's influence in Eurasia, forcing Moscow to dance to Beijing's tune. Putin once praised BRI as a desire for cooperation, but behind the diplomatic pleasantries, Russia fears that BRI is dimming its own regional role. China's transcontinental trade network runs through Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and Russia's Far East, where Moscow once held absolute control. Currently, China is heavily investing in railway lines and cross-border bridges connecting Manchuria with Russia's Far East. From there, Beijing can easily control the flow of goods, energy, and data across Eurasia. Though Russia has never acknowledged the risk, experts believe this is the first step in a strategy of soft control replacement, turning Siberia and Russia's Far East into economic dependencies on China. Moscow's official response remains denial of all suspicions. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova insists both nations resolved all border issues back in 2004. But the truth is that laws cannot protect influence when real power is gradually shifting into Beijing's hands. Russia needs China to survive the crisis, while China needs Russia as a shield and strategic stepping stone. But behind the friendly facade, both are quietly calculating. Beijing uses technology, trade, and infrastructure to absorb influence, while Moscow, though knowing it's being monitored, must remain silent because there are no other options. As Russia's economy is depleted and its military exhausted, China becomes the holder of the survival key, controlling energy, raw materials, supply chains, and now even Moscow's data flows. Therefore, on the day Ukraine declares victory over Russia, China may achieve de facto control of the Far East without firing a shot. That will be the first step in a new Eurasian order, where Beijing replaces Moscow as the center of power.
The Berlin Declaration suddenly becomes a death knell for Putin's regime. Challenger to the Kremlin throne is the oil tycoon who was once Russia's richest man. He declares he has found an opportunity for the country. Once Putin's inner circle fractures, opposition forces will immediately act. This is the political spark that will change Russia once and for all. Putin's power shaken to its core as the Berlin Declaration emerges. The Berlin Declaration was adopted in spring 2023, bearing the signatures of the world's most powerful Russian opposition figures. This document outlines 5 core points: calling the war in Ukraine a war crime, demanding withdrawal from all Ukrainian territories, including Crimea, defining Putin's regime as illegitimate and criminal, requiring its removal, calling for the release of political prisoners and the establishment of an independent judiciary, pledging to unite Russians at home and abroad against dictatorship, proposing a new political roadmap for a democratic post-Putin Russia. The FSB views this declaration as a soft coup plan because it not only challenges Putin's power, but also paints a future where he has no place at all. The FSB understands clearly that Putin's most dangerous enemy is not NATO or Ukraine, but Russians who can think independently. So, who is behind the Berlin Declaration? None other than the oil king who once held the title of Russia's richest man. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, from oil tycoon to enemy of the Kremlin. Mikhail Khodorkovsky, born June 26, 1963 in Moscow, was once one of Russia's most powerful businessmen, a symbol of the chaotic privatization era after the Soviet Union's collapse. He was not only an oil billionaire, but also one of the most controversial figures in modern Russian political history. Khodorkovsky grew up in an ordinary Soviet family. Both parents were engineers at a measuring equipment factory. Despite his modest origins, he showed great ambition early on and achieved outstanding academic results. When the policies of glasnost and perestroika began, he leveraged connections to enter the business world. With backing from powerful friends, especially Alexei Golubovich, son of a senior banking official, Khodorkovsky quickly built his first business empire in commerce and finance. After the Soviet Union dissolved, Khodorkovsky was among the first to seize large-scale privatization opportunities. He acquired the oil giant Yukos, one of the largest companies in post-Soviet Russia, at a bargain price during the chaotic early 1990s. Yukos rapidly grew powerful, making Khodorkovsky Russia's richest man and 16th on Forbes's global billionaire list in 2004. His growing wealth and political influence made him a symbol of the new oligarch generation, a group controlling Russia's economy through financial power and political connections. In October 2003, at the height of his fame, Khodorkovsky was suddenly arrested in Siberia on charges of fraud and tax evasion. The Russian government subsequently seized Yukos shares, citing massive tax debts, causing the company to collapse and virtually all his assets to vanish. In 2005, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison, later receiving additional sentences for embezzlement and money laundering, extending his detention until 2014. While many viewed this as an anti-corruption move, observers saw it as a warning shot from President Vladimir Putin aimed at oligarchs with political ambitions. After 10 years in prison, Khodorkovsky was pardoned in 2013 through the intervention of former German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher. He left Russia immediately after his release. Upon release, Khodorkovsky promised not to engage in politics. But after his mother's death, he established Open Russia, aiming to build a free, democratic Russia under the rule of law. This organization quickly became a thorn in the Kremlin's side, accused of inciting anti-government sentiment. Khodorkovsky asserts, "The only chance to change Russia is when Putin's inner circle fractures." From a small room in Madrid, Khodorkovsky declares, "Russia cannot be changed through elections or peaceful protests. The only realistic opportunity is a split within Putin's regime itself, and when that moment comes, the people must be ready to fight." When asked about the domestic situation, Khodorkovsky describes, "It's a society exhausted by war but seeing no end. People no longer resist, nor do they support, just apathy. The fear of losing is great, while the possibility of Putin voluntarily withdrawing is zero. According to him, the scenario of people taking to the streets to overthrow the government is nearly impossible because security forces remain absolutely loyal. The only way to change is an internal conflict, when factions within the government start blaming each other after a serious military defeat. In that situation, Putin's collapse is entirely possible. Answering questions about preparing for a potentially violent change, Khodorkovsky is clear. Direct confrontation with the army or state security forces is impossible. That's unrealistic. The most feasible way is to exploit a fracture within the ruling elite, when the military stands aside or becomes divided. He uses Belarus as an example. People stood in front of government buildings but didn't enter. In Russia, stopping at that level leads nowhere. When opportunity appears, people must be ready to act. Not many, no heavy weapons needed, just the will not to back down. Khodorkovsky admits the opposition failed to capitalize when Yevgeny Prigozhin launched his mutiny in June 2023. That was a rare moment. If the uprising had lasted at least 3 days, perhaps the people would have risen up. But it only lasted 10 hours, too short to create a chain reaction. According to him, the real central figure was not Prigozhin, but General Sergei Surovikin, who had commanded the campaign in Ukraine. Prigozhin lacked sufficient power within the military. Surovikin was the strategic link. Many senior officers sided with them but didn't act. And then, everything ended too quickly. Khodorkovsky analyzes that after the Wagner rebellion, Putin regained some control, but cracks remain. First, urban residents no longer trust him. Second, loyalty within the military has been damaged. And third, Prigozhin's death showed Russia's elite that making deals with Putin is useless, because ultimately, he still kills those who helped him. When asked about the risk of civil war, Khodorkovsky is calm. I've lived through 2 similar moments. In 1991, when conservatives staged a coup against Gorbachev, and in 1993, when Yeltsin opened fire on parliament. Both were contained within a narrow scope. If a new fracture erupts, it will be the same. Khodorkovsky concludes, the likelihood of a new fracture within Putin's inner circle depends on how the war unfolds. When the Kremlin faces a clear defeat, whether military or economic, the risk of uprising will surge. The question is, will the opposition be prepared in time to seize that moment? He ends with a sharp statement. Russian history always changes not through ballots, but through cracks in power. The question is, this time, who will dare step into that crack before it closes? Khodorkovsky asserts, Russian generals are incompetent. Chief of General Staff Gerasimov is just a master flatterer and liar. Despite the FSB arrest warrant, on October 16th, the Russian oil king Mikhail Khodorkovsky posted a video titled, All Russian generals are incompetent, dishonorable. Why do soldiers hate their commanders? In the video, he says, do you know which generals are the heroes of the so-called special military operation? I mean real military leaders, like loyal servants of the Tsar, fathers of soldiers. As for me, someone closely following the war's developments, I don't know any such person. Strange, isn't it? Let's analyze more carefully. Starting right from the top, Chief of General Staff Valery Gerasimov. In case you don't know, he's still officially commanding the so-called special military operation. Actually, before the war in Ukraine began, Gerasimov had a reputation as a great military theorist. The so-called Gerasimov Doctrine was studied and commented on by the West, albeit somewhat sarcastically. He authored the very hybrid war that Russia launched in Donbass in 2014. Everything changed after February 2022. The complete failure of the special military operation, clearly planned with the most active participation of the Chief of General Staff. The result is a bloody war that has dragged on for nearly 3 years with no sign of military conclusion. Gerasimov rarely appears publicly. He's famous not for military successes or even his statements, but thanks to criticism from Putin's chef, Prigozhin. I'm sure you remember. Shoigu, Gerasimov, where's the ammunition, you bastards? Some appeals from Wagner soldiers to Gerasimov even exceeded all limits. During the Wagner rebellion in June 2023, Gerasimov disappeared notably. According to rumors, Prigozhin very much wanted to find him and Shoigu to directly ask where the ammunition actually was. Besides Prigozhin's gift, the Chief of General Staff is mainly famous for lies on an unimaginable scale. For example, the day after Ukrainian forces began their attack on Kursk Oblast, he reported to Putin that the enemy's offensive had been stopped and promised to advance to the national border. Through the actions of National Border Support Units, coordinated with border guards and reinforcement units, through airstrikes, missiles, and artillery, the enemy's advance deep into territory toward Kursk has been stopped. The operation will end with the enemy's defeat and advance to the national border. That was on August 7, 2024. After that, Ukrainian forces captured about another 1,000 square kilometers of Kursk Oblast border areas. But this reassuring lie misled residents in the area. Instead of urgent evacuation, they fell into the combat zone. Many died. As for the promise to advance to the national border then, Gerasimov himself reported again at the end of April 2025, that is, after 9 months. At the same time, Gerasimov reported to Putin completely absurd losses of Ukrainian forces in Kursk Oblast. More than 7,700 units of military equipment destroyed, including 412 tanks, 340 infantry fighting vehicles, 314 armored personnel carriers, about 2,300 other armored combat vehicles. Of course, lying to superiors is not just a characteristic of generals, but of any official in Putin's power system. It's just that, for generals, this directly affects human lives, both their own soldiers and civilians. And contempt for human life is an inherited characteristic of the General Corps under Putin. For example, Rustam Muradov, Lieutenant General, a Dagestani, as is customary, a hero of Russia. He's mainly famous for failed attacks on Pavlovka and Vuhledar in winter 2022 to 2023. These attacks were accompanied by extremely heavy personnel losses, at levels of 150 to 300 people per day. As a result, the fields around Vuhledar looked like this. Surprisingly, in assessing General Muradov's military talent, Western experts and Z supporters share a common view: a crazy fool. According to a famous pro-Z war correspondent, Roman Alyokin, who ironically is considered a foreign agent, Muradov once declared, "You feeling sorry for people? They'll give us new ones." In April 2023, Muradov was finally removed as commander of the Vostok Group. By December 2024, he was appointed first deputy commander of the Russian Armed Forces Ground Forces, a position that, though retired, is still quite prestigious. Another military leader of the Special Military Operation, Major General Andrei Buylov. Since 2023, he has commanded the 15th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade bearing the Order of Suvorov. This brigade is also called Black Cavalry. It's Russia's only peacekeeping brigade. This peacekeeping brigade, since the invasion of Ukraine began, has lost over 12,000 military personnel in battles. More than half of them are confirmed killed. The rest are declared missing. The peak of losses occurred after Buylov was appointed brigade commander. And of course, for these bloody attacks, these meat grinder battles, the general received the Hero Star. This is how soldiers under his command describe Buylov's leadership. He's an absolute scoundrel, a corrupt bastard. In his brigade, every position is bought and sold. Medals in our brigade? Buylov is very stingy with awarding. While in other units, they at least try to award some good medal. Who knows, in some case it will help the soldier. If a soldier doesn't die in a meat grinder battle, Putin's general will still find a way to kill his subordinate. Summer offensive fails. 100,000 Russian soldiers helpless at Pokrovsk. Putin loses credibility within the military. Russia's summer offensive campaign with 100,000 troops, which Vladimir Putin hoped would be a strategic turning point to capture all of Donbass before winter, has officially failed miserably. Instead of planting victory flags, the Russian army has suffered the heaviest losses since early 2025. Since August 21st, according to reports from the Ukrainian General Staff, 13,945 Russian soldiers have been removed from combat, including over 8,400 killed, 5,400 wounded, and 124 captured as prisoners of war. Dozens of Russian tanks, armored vehicles, and logistics vehicles were destroyed or abandoned on the Pokrovsk battlefield. Putin's order to capture all of Donbass before October has become a symbol of strategic delusion, as Moscow lost not only manpower but also the capability for mechanized offensive on the eastern front. After weeks of failed mechanized attacks, Ukrainian forces launched a large-scale sweep operation in the Dobropilya area, especially around Volodymyrovka village, now called Russian Tank Cemetery by Ukrainian soldiers. Ukrainian infantry units, supported by reconnaissance UAVs and FPV attack drones, are sweeping the gray zone between two defensive lines, hunting surviving Russian soldiers hiding in dugouts and bushes. According to on-site reports, many Russian soldiers fled in chaos, not returning to rear lines but retreating deep into the Nikhanorivka and Zatishok areas, where other Russian forces have been surrounded for weeks. This makes Russia's death pocket even more packed with people, without ammunition, supplies, or escape routes. A Ukrainian officer noted, "The more Russian soldiers try to hide in the pocket, the easier we eliminate them." Each person added there is just another target in UAV sights. The failure at Pokrovsk is not just a military defeat, but a strategic collapse for the entire Kremlin campaign. Putin had hoped victory in Donbass would help him create political leverage before winter, when Ukraine faces an energy crisis and the West is divided by the Middle East. But instead of summer victory, Russia sinks into a bloody and desperate autumn. Unable to capture Donbass, unable to control Pokrovsk, and losing tens of thousands of soldiers, this is not just a battlefield defeat but a severe blow to Putin's legitimacy, who had declared to the world about comprehensive victory before winter. But as winter approaches, his army becomes more deeply mired. Russian logistics continue to be attacked by Ukrainian UAVs, while Moscow's economy faces fuel crisis, soaring inflation, and internal instability.